I think in a way the company was founded in the war, sort of forged in the cauldron of the First World War, but its lineage actually goes back much further than that. It goes back to, well, the advent of these fabulous motor cars that had been racing around Ireland before the war, long before the war. And I think that was the thing. The McMullans recognized that the great age of motoring was coming, no matter what the new post-war world looked like. So they had a very tight focus on that and made sure that when that age came, that they would be the leaders of it, certainly in Ireland.
In their early days in Newry, they used to get kerosene or lamp oil and knock on doors like people did with coal. They did it with lamp oil. That was in their sort of 15, 16-year-old age time. So they were familiar with oil. And then my grandfather, William, started working with a chemist in Newry. One of the big things chemists sold in those days was paraffin oil, as I said, lamp oil. Everybody had oil lamps. It's only in the cities did they have any electricity. But he began to see that he should try and get involved in oil, that more and more people were having cars and petrol and all that kind of stuff.
There was a genius from early on for knowing what the market wanted. So, for instance, when the war ended, rationing was still in place, and William realised that there were thousands of motorists all around Ireland who, couldn't get fuel because of rationing. And so he then went and found benzol, this alternative fuel that people could run their cars on, and he imported a lot of it into Ireland. And a lot of people say, wow, we love this stuff. And that was really the beginning of the company. That's the making of their first fortune. Fast forward a year and that benzol boom is over for various reasons, but William's already on the case. He goes to England and he comes back with this amazing contract, this exclusive agency to sell MEX, one of the biggest fuels going at that time. He gets the exclusive agency to sell that throughout the 32 counties of Ireland. So again, it's pushing through doors, but making sure that your timing is immaculate, which it was in both instances. When the company was taking shape, 1918, 1919, there is a big rebellion going on, mainly down south. But what is different about this rebellion is the rebels are going to win. Nobody knew that at the time, of course, but the rebels do win, or at least they win partition and the Free State. And that tumbles into civil war and all that, but that's the sort of the backdrop against which McMullan's is born. And I get the sense that William McMullan kind of thrived in that world. I mean, it must have been very unpredictable, but it kind of suited his nature. He was kind of gung-ho, a little bit reckless, and a little bit, unpredictable himself. And so he would have, as I say, thrived during that. But for J.G., his brother would have been the vital steady Eddie at the same time.
J.G. was the elder. He was the second son in the family. And William, who was always known as the boss, was the third son, and then there was a fourth son who worked in the journalism business. William was a risk taker, basically, and J.G., his elder brother, was risk averse. He was an accountant, and as a result was much more cautious. And that increasingly in the 20s became a problem. I think they came to the conclusion they were never going to be able to work together. My J.G. was terribly worried that William was going to make an awful mistake by taking a big risk. So Grandpa William bought out J.G.
The petrol industry actually wasn't as badly affected as many other industries because more and more vehicles are coming onto the roads and indeed tractors onto farms and so on. So McMullans were doing all right, actually. They were expanding throughout the 1930s. They'd also moved into domestic gas with Calor gas. And so that was all going along reasonably okay for them, and they were making a lot of money. But then war breaks out, and that's a massive game changer. When the war came, nobody was in any doubt that fuel supplies would be absolutely vital to winning it. And I don't think it was a big surprise when the governments in both jurisdictions, in Northern Ireland and in the Free State, took over the respective oil industries. In the north it was the Petroleum Board, it became known as the Pool, and in the south it was the Ministry of Supplies, run by Sean Lemass. So they took over the entire industry. A lot of Maxol employees, McMullan Brothers employees, joined both the Pool and the Ministry of Supplies, and indeed quite a lot of them joined the armed forces, particularly up in the north, including Billy McMullan, the son of William, the son of the boss. He joined the RAF. So the war immediately, changed everything for McMullan Brothers. So by about 1941, the situation is pretty critical. There is severe rationing going on. So, cars are off the road, mechanics are out of businesses, garages are closed. All the Maxol's, McMullan Brothers supply contracts would have been suspended. Very dramatic. The domestic gas business completely died. They began selling a lot of their fleet of their trucks and their vans and tanker wagons were sold. And the horse and cart was back, which is, lovely for the countryside, but less good if you're McMullan Brothers, perhaps. So for McMullans, there was very little that they could actually do until rationing ended. And it did, of course, end in the late 40s, but it was a very slow process. People were very, wary of suddenly releasing lots of fuel back into the market for various reasons. But there was always that sense that it is going to come back, and that when it does come back, there is going to be a new golden age for the car industry, because everybody now wanted a car.
I think the biggest shock in the oil industry was after World War II, because up until then, we could put up a petrol pump on anybody else's petrol station. So, most of the stations, I'm calling them stations, but they were really curbside pumps. And you could have a pub with a Shell pump, a BP pump, a Maxol pump, a Texaco pump, all in a line. And the customer decided which one he wanted to pull up to. So it was quite very unrestricted as to where you put your pumps. After the oil industry was freed up again after World War II and the government handed our businesses back to us, the American system was brought in Ireland and in England, I presume, which was called solus trading. And that was that any supplier of petrol negotiated with all the oil companies and signed a deal with one company for 20 years. And he would only have the fuel of the company he signed the deal with. Now that made life an awful lot more difficult for us, because we were a small Irish company and the majors could offer all sorts of inducements to get a solus contract. The major oil companies had all the plum sites kind of thing, and we had the one pump outside of pub and all that kind of thing. But still, things have evolved over the years, and I think we probably have as good, if not better, big sites than some of the major oil companies.
The 1950s have been pretty bleak for Ireland in terms of been mass emigration and so on. The 60s, it might not have been the swinging 60s as such, but things were changing, and Ireland was already on that road that would lead them into Europe in the early 70s. And there was that sense of opening up to the world, I think. And again, even with emigration, for instance, it was changing. The nature of emigration was changing. So people had gone to America and to the UK, but now they were coming back. You're able to come back. You're able to come back by plane or by boat and drive around the country in your car. And so people were doing that, and they were bringing, there is a sense that new ideas were coming back to Ireland. And a lot about the 60s was actually new, and particularly for Maxol. Maxol entered a new era. William McMullan, his death in 1963, at the time of his death, Maxol, or McMullan Brothers as it still was then, was the biggest Irish-owned petrol distribution company on the island of Ireland. William, he hadn't been a dinosaur in terms of adaptability and changing and modernising, But after his death, there was definitely a new shift towards a new age. Maxol were quite on the ball with the 60s in their own way. They had people like Freddie and the Dreamers, and Tommy Macon would be snipping ribbons at new petrol stations, or the wonderful Rosemary Smith. Again, they'd be fueling up their cars, and they'd be on hand with the press to take pictures of them. And it was all part of this new brand. They introduced new colours, new uniforms, new logos, and indeed a new name, Maxol. At the start of the 1970s, Maxol's now 50 years old. Everything's looking pretty peachy. It's quite well established. What could possibly go wrong? And then there are two major global oil crises.
Oh, it was a terrible time, obviously, for the business. It was a terrible time for motorists. I mean, people were queuing for miles, and 2 hours waiting to get to the front of the queue to get 2 gallons kind of thing. Overnight, the Arabs, who controlled most of the world's oil, nationalised Shell, BP, all the oil companies. And in the first oil crisis, they put the price of a barrel of oil up from about $2 to about $6 a barrel. And in the second oil crisis, they put it up from $6 to about $20 a barrel, which is an enormous increase. And the Irish government here had introduced price control, that you couldn't alter the price on your pump without a government decision. So in a sense, it was really self-inflicted. If the pump prices could have reflected the international oil prices, there still would have been a bit of rationing, but it was far exceeded by the intransigence of the price control mechanism, allowing us to reflect the international situation.
The problem was that the price of crude oil had quadrupled for them to buy, but the government wouldn't allow an increase in the price at the pump. So it was the petrol stations, it was Maxol and so on, who were taking the big hit.
With some very successful promotions in the 80s. My brother-in-law is in the jewellery business, and he told me at the time that we almost closed down the watch sales in jewellery shops because we were giving away digital watches, and we were giving these away, 10 gallons of petrol and you get a watch. It was an amazing time.
Maxol became a household name in the 1980s through genius, really, of their marketing campaigns. The main one was "Free a Nipper, Rui," which changed absolutely everything. Suddenly everybody, including children, knew who Maxol was.
You see him? He's me friend Nipper. Isn't he only gorgeous? Me dad freed him from Maxol, and now all me friends are doing their no. You could free one as well, because Maxol have thousands just waiting to be freed.
Free a nipper! Free a nipper!
See what I mean? Free your own nipper where you see this sign. Right.
So the Free Nipper campaign was a carrot-munching glove puppet that was on promotion in all Maxol service stations in 1985. It was fronted by Brendan Grace, the much loved and hugely popular comedian at the time. Having Brendan Grace fronting the advertising campaign was a stroke of genius. Brendan Grace, as you know, was hugely popular at the time and probably at the peak of his career, and already a huge household name across the nation. So by linking in with him, it just worked really, really well.
They became an absolute rage with kids, and there were 6 colours, and everybody wanted to have one of each colour.
They also were brilliant at sponsorship, and the boxing sponsorship was key at that time. They sponsored boxing, which was on RTE regularly throughout the late 80s. And this is leading up to, Olympic glory for Ireland. Again, Maxol are there, their name is all over. Anybody who's into the boxing world would have thought.
It wasn't a very popular sport with advertisers kind of thing, and we were able to afford it. I mean, most of the big sports, we couldn't touch them compared to the major oil companies. And it was a very successful promotion. And RTE were very supportive of boxing because they used to use the National Boxing Championship as a filler later in the year, like in the interval between, so we were getting a lot of TV exposure using it. So it was very successful for us.
Throughout the history of the company, sponsorship has been a key pillar from a marketing perspective. Starting right back in the 1920s with the sponsorship of the Irish International Grand Prix in Phoenix Park in 1928 and 29. So right up till today, where we are sponsoring Ulster Rugby since 2013. We've also been sponsor of the Irish Universities Rugby Union for the last 29 years. So sponsorship will continue to play a hugely important role for us going forward.
Maxol was sort of born in troubled times in 1920 with the pogroms and so on, so it had always had an awareness of that. But when the troubles reignited in 1969, that had a different and very dramatic effect, of course. In Belfast at the head office, they had to put this sort of cling film on all over the windows in case when bombs exploded, to stop the glass coming in. I think the Belfast head office filed something like 40 malicious damage claims on filling stations that had been attacked during the course of the time. And the same in Dublin. I mean, Dublin, when the bombs came, one bomb exploded very close to Apollo House, which was the McMullan brothers' Maxol headquarters. Another bomb, one of the sales team lost a sister. So it was dark times, of course.
The original company in 1920 was McMullan Brothers Limited, and at that stage Ireland was a 32-county united country. A year later, partition took place and we had Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. But we continued to operate as one company up until 1936, when, I suppose for fiscal reasons, it was decided it was becoming too complicated with different VATs and one thing and another. And all of the Northern Ireland assets and liabilities were transferred into a new company. So for the first time, we had two companies operating on the island of Ireland. This meant that every role was duplicated. North Ireland General Manager, Southern Ireland General Operations Manager, North Operations Manager, South, etc. Reps, the whole lot. And, a Northern Ireland truck would deliver as far as the border, but there might be a mech site a mile down the road in Southern Ireland, but he had to turn around and go back, and we had to send a truck up from Dublin. That kind of inefficiency, you can imagine, was going on. So we made the decision to merge, not corporately to merge, but operationally to merge the two companies. And I mean, now, we deliver into Donegal from Belfast, with Donegal being in the 26 counties, and vice versa. We don't recognise the border operationally.
In the mid-1990s, Maxol becomes a pioneer in the field of integration when the management of both the Belfast and Dublin offices are integrated as one, they're merged as one. And it is a pioneering moment in corporate history that also, I'm quite sure, would have inspired those who are trying to figure out how do we, improve the peace process, which was ongoing at that time. And indeed, it's something you'd look at if you're an enthusiast for reunification generally. And basically, they brought the senior team from Belfast and the senior team from Dublin. They met in a hotel in County Louth and they said, nobody's leaving here until we've worked this out. And there was a lot of heads bashing together, but with the bashing came familiarity, and they ended up becoming rather fond of each other and working out all the things that they did have in common rather than the differences, and the bits where they could work together. And ultimately, you get the strong sense that everybody came away feeling this is a very positive step we're taking here.
What a visionary at that time in terms of deciding to bring the two management teams together. As you know, there was a lot of political instability right across Ireland at that particular point in time. And one thing within our business, we treated everyone as the same. We tried to move forward together. And really what happened in the early part of the 90s, where a couple of management consultants were brought into the business to almost facilitate those discussions. And I think at that time we were probably quite unique. I think we were seen as being, is this ever going to work? Because of the political background and because of certain views that people held. But I have to say, I was involved in that process, everyone openly engaged, and because I think it was completely new, what we developed really was the blueprint, not only for our business, but for many other Irish businesses. It was great to be involved in something that was going to be quite revolutionary in terms of how business viewed the island of Ireland.
They've also always had a really good, strong ability to adapt, to modernise, to change, right back to the beginning. So they're always updating their fleets, their pumps, their stations, how their fuel is distributed, even how their business thinking is changed a lot in the 60s and the 80s again, and the 90s again. Even in this century, they're constantly changing, adapting to the new environmental challenges and so on. And adaptability, that flexibility is, again, key.
This is obviously our big worry now, because fossil fuel has suddenly become less than welcome in the world, and everybody's going for electric cars. So with that in mind, we've been diversifying quite a bit. I mean, our filling stations now look very different from what they would have done 20 years ago. We have to think of ways of becoming less and less dependent on sales of fossil fuels.
Today, our business has transformed from being a fuel-centric retailer to one today which is recognised as being a leader in terms of food service and convenience, in terms of serving the communities in which we have our service stations. So it's completely flipped it on its head. Whenever I joined in 1986, what most of our profits came from were fuel, probably 90–95%. Today, less than 50% of our income comes from fuel. And it's very important that, under my leadership, that we have a strategy that not only recognises the success of the past 100 years within this business, but we lay down the foundations for the next 100 years.
I think one of our key strengths is the fact that we have been based in the community for the last 100 years, and that is something that is quite unique to us. Our focus is not on the motorways, it's very much in neighbourhoods and in the community. A lot of our sites are run by local people. They employ local people, whether that be on a part-time or a full-time basis.
For us, it's very important that we remain to be the centre of the community, and that's where our stores are located. So that's the first box ticked. We're in the right locations because you have a good population around us, both in terms of household but also in terms of business enterprise. The range of services in store will probably evolve and grow, both in terms of food service and the type of convenience products that we provide. But also we would like to introduce pharmacies within our stores. We'd also like to introduce dry cleaning services into our businesses, and also much more home delivery as well. So it's about continuing to make sure our sites offer all of those services that our customer needs demand over time. Within the next 10 years, all I can say is what you have today will be very different by the time we get to 2030.
I teamed up with Maxol about 12 years ago, and the experience has been very exciting, and we've enjoyed bringing our food expertise along with Maxol's vision, evolving into ultra-modern forecourts that you see here today.
We got involved with Maxol in 1990. The experience has been very good. They're a very easy company to deal with. They're family owned, so they're much smaller. There's always somebody at the end of the phone. We've had nothing but good things to say about them.
The customer now is coming for what I would call a multi-purpose trip into the store, and they're having more dwell time on our sites. And yeah, I remember the time, when 90% of the reason to come to a forecourt was just for fuel, whereas today it's about 50%. And really, what Maxol and ourselves have created is a super modern convenience store with expert customer service that just happens to sell fuel.
We're all proud, the staff as well, of the longevity of the business. We're the only one left who have been in the oil game since, 1917 really, but the company formed in 1920. All our power derives from the customers.
It's been a lot of hard work for sure, but I think that family dynamic has been absolutely key since the beginning. Bear in mind that you have, with William McMullan, you have effectively one man who is in charge of the company for the first 43 years. I know JG, his brother, was there, of course, at the start. And then his sons and grandchildren and great-grandchildren are there today. But that sense of loyalty, even though it is, every family has its complications along the way, it's come through some pretty tough, adverse times, and the family is, very strong part of the project to this day.
I have to say, in my 35 years within this business, there hasn't been a day where I haven't wanted to go to work. I love what I do. I feel like an extension of the McMullan family. And I think that's one of the key differences we have against a global organisation. We treat people with respect. We treat people with dignity. We don't look at them as a number, we look at them as a person. And look, let's be honest, many people go through tragedies, their personal situations, be those deaths within families, or births within families, or marriages. We try to celebrate that as one family. And for me, I think that's one of the things that we have above and beyond in terms of all of our competitors. We have a fantastic culture within the organisation, which comes from the top down, from our board of directors and from the McMullan family.
There's been a lot of smart thinking along the way, and clever campaigns, Free a Nipper and boxing sponsorship and things like that, as well as serendipity or perfect timing, right back to the beginning when William McMullan was going off and getting the Benzol deal or the Mex deal. They've often been in just the right place at the right time, so you can call that luck or intuition, but they've certainly had a lot of whatever that is. It is that strength that has allowed it to endure, to survive against all those multinationals that it's been competing with throughout the decades, all the way back to Shell back in the 1920s. Maxol was a minnow all along, but now I don't think it's a minnow anymore, it's a major.